The silence in the Aethelgard penthouse was more damning than any scream. Perched 76 stories above Manhattan, with the city lights scattered like a carpet of fallen stars, the world felt infinite. But for Annelise Rowan, it had just shrunk to the size of a gilded cage. Conrad Gideon's voice, a low rumble accustomed to absolute obedience, sliced through the chilled air. "Let me be perfectly clear," he said, his reflection a severe silhouette against the floor-to-ceiling glass. "Without me, you are nothing. You'll be on the street within a week. You will never, ever survive." He didn't shout. He didn't have to. It was a statement of fact, a law of his universe. He was the sun, and she was just a planet caught in his orbit, existing only by his light. What he didn't know was that some planets are capable of igniting themselves. Life with Conrad Gideon was a masterclass in atmospheric pressure. Annelise had learned to read the subtle shifts in the air, the tightening of his jaw that preceded a market dip, the almost imperceptible flare of his nostrils when a rival secured a contract he'd coveted. For 3 years, she had been the perfect accessory to his billion-dollar empire, a serene and beautiful presence gliding through charity galas, board meetings, and weekend jaunts to Monaco on his private jet, the Odyssey. He called her his little bird, a term she'd once found endearing, but now felt like the bars of her cage. He'd discovered her, as he liked to tell it, curating a small but daring exhibition for a new artist in a Chelsea gallery. He'd been captivated by her quiet intelligence and the way she spoke about art, not as a commodity, but as a conversation across centuries. He had pursued her with the same relentless, overwhelming force he applied to his hostile takeovers. He didn't court. He acquired. The Aethelgard penthouse was the pinnacle of his collection. It wasn't a home. It was a statement, spanning the entire top floor of the newest, most audacious skyscraper on 57th Street. It was a monument to aggressive wealth. The floors were Italian marble, so white and seamless they looked like frozen milk. The furniture was stark modernist, and chosen by a designer Conrad had paid a fortune to never meet Annelise. It was his space. Her only contributions were the clothes in her walk-in closet, all purchased by him, and the single small painting she had insisted on hanging in her dressing room. It was a moody, abstract landscape by an unknown artist she believed in, full of turbulent blues and a defiant slash of gold. Conrad called it the smudge. The routine was immutable. He worked, she waited. He commanded, she complied. He entertained powerful, ruthless men who looked through her as if she were part of the decor, and she would smile, ensuring their glasses were never empty, her opinions never voiced. She was an expert at being invisible in plain sight. But beneath the placid surface, a different current was flowing. Annelise wasn't just observing. She was studying. At those dinners, while Conrad and his cronies discussed leveraged buyouts and market manipulation, she listened. She absorbed names, strategies, vulnerabilities. She learned the language of their world, not to join it, but to understand the architecture of her prison. Her only true solace was her clandestine connection to the art world she'd left behind. Using a private encrypted email account on a burner phone, she continued to advise a select group of clients. She had a preternatural eye for spotting emerging talent before the hype cycle began, while Conrad was sinking millions into blue-chip stocks that moved by fractions of a percent. Annelise was quietly guiding her clients and her own discreet trust fund, a legacy from a grandmother Conrad had dismissed as old money dust, into art that was doubling, then tripling in value. He never thought to ask about her finances. In his mind, her financial state began and ended with the platinum card he provided. The beginning of the end started with a deal Conrad called the Keystone. It was a massively leveraged play to corner the global distribution of coltan, a critical mineral for electronics. It was audacious, risky, and quintessentially Conrad. He poured hundreds of millions into it, borrowing heavily against his assets, including the Aethelgard itself. "This Annelise," he'd said, standing before the vast window, gesturing to the city below as if he were its king, "is what separates the gods from the mortals. Mortals diversify. Gods go all in." She felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Penthouse's climate control. She had overheard the name of his primary competitor in the deal, a ruthless Belgian consortium. A few weeks prior, at a dreary fundraising dinner, she'd been seated next to a junior analyst from that very consortium. He was young, nervous, and clearly starstruck by Conrad's presence. Making small talk, Annelise had casually mentioned how much Conrad admired a particular logistics company in South America, a company she knew from his private calls was the weakest, most over-leveraged link in his entire coltan supply chain strategy. She framed it as a compliment, a piece of harmless party chatter. The analyst's eyes had widened almost imperceptibly. He thought he was getting insider information. Annelise knew she was planting a seed. Now, weeks later, the deal was starting to sour. The Belgian consortium was making moves that were unnervingly precise, targeting the exact vulnerabilities Conrad thought were his secret. His mood grew darker, the atmospheric pressure in the penthouse becoming unbearable. He became paranoid, short-tempered. He'd pace the marble floors for hours, his phone calls becoming clipped and harsh. The final confrontation came on a Tuesday night. He'd lost a staggering sum that day, the coltan deal teetering on the brink of collapse. He came into the penthouse like a storm front, shedding his jacket and yanking at his tie. Annelise was in the main living area reading a book. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "Reading," she answered calmly, not looking up. "Reading?" He scoffed the word an insult. "The world is burning and you're reading. Do you have any idea what's happening? Do you have any concept of the forces at play right now?" She finally closed her book, marking her page carefully. "I know the coltan deal is failing. I know the Belgian consortium seems to know your playbook." His eyes narrowed. "What do you know about it?" "You've been listening. Snooping." "I live here, Conrad. It's impossible not to hear you when you're shouting at your brokers." She stood up, her composure a stark contrast to his barely contained rage. "Perhaps you over-leveraged. Perhaps your play was too predictable." That was it. The challenge. The suggestion that he, Conrad Gideon the god, was fallible. He strode towards her, his physical presence overwhelming. For a moment she thought he might strike her. Instead, he stopped just short, his face a mask of contempt. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he seethed. "You with your little paintings and your empty head. Everything you have because of me. This roof over your head, the clothes on your back, the food you eat, it's all from me. Don't you dare presume to understand my world. It's a world built on a foundation of debt and ego," she replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "Sometimes foundations crack." The fury in his eyes was eclipsed by a cold, cruel certainty. He smiled a terrifyingly serene expression. "Let's say it does. Let's say it all comes crashing down. Where does that leave you? You have nothing. No career, no money of your own. You are a dependent, an object." He leaned in, his voice dropping to that damning whisper. Let me be perfectly clear. Without me, you are nothing. You'll be on the street within a week. You will never, ever survive." Annelise met his gaze. The fear she had lived with for 3 years was gone, calcined into something hard and unyielding. She didn't say a word. She simply held his stare until he, unnerved by her silence, turned away in disgust. "Get out of my sight," he growled, stalking towards his office and slamming the door. Annelise stood alone in the cavernous room, the city lights glittering indifferently. He thought it was an execution. He didn't realize it was a declaration of war, and he had just handed her the terms of her victory. The days that followed were a symphony of disintegration, and Annelise had a front-row seat. Conrad, locked in his home office, which he called the command center, was a general watching his army get routed. The swagger was gone, replaced by a frantic, brittle energy. His booming voice was now a hoarse rasp on calls with bankers and lawyers, a mixture of pleading and threatening that fooled no one. He was hemorrhaging money. The Belgian consortium, armed with what seemed like clairvoyant knowledge of his strategy, had not only countered his every move, but had preemptively locked down alternative shipping routes and processing facilities, rendering his entire investment toxic. The logistics company Annelise had mentioned to the young analyst had, as she predicted, folded under pressure, triggering a cascade of defaults throughout Conrad's network. The keystone hadn't just cracked, it had turned to dust, and the arch was collapsing. Conrad's arrogance prevented him from seeing the truth. He blamed traitors in his company conspirators on Wall Street and incompetent advisors. He never once considered that the source of his ruin might be the silent woman who brought him his coffee each morning. He was so convinced of her irrelevance that the possibility didn't even exist in his universe. While he fought his losing war, Annelise began to mobilize her own forces. Her primary weapon was a man Conrad had met once and dismissed as a fossil. Mr. Alistair Finch was Annelise's family lawyer. He was in his late 60s, with spectacles perched on the end of his nose and a penchant for tweed jackets that were at least a decade out of style. He operated out of a quiet wood-paneled office in a pre-war building that smelled of old books and lemon polish. Conrad, who equated power with glass towers and shouting, saw Finch as a relic. Annelise knew he was a shark who preferred to swim in quiet waters. "He's panicking," Annelise said, sitting opposite Finch's cluttered mahogany desk. She had slipped out of the Aethelgard on the pretense of a spa appointment. "He's making emotional decisions, doubling down on his losses." Finch steepled his fingers, his gaze sharp and analytical. "Panic is a dreadful investment strategy. The margin calls will be coming soon. The banks, my dear Annelise, are not sentimental. They will want their pound of flesh, and Mr. Gideon has offered them a feast." "The penthouse is the primary collateral," she stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Indeed, leveraged to the hilt," Finch confirmed, consulting a folder. "A first lien from a syndicate led by Deutsche Bank. They will want to liquidate it quickly and quietly to recoup their losses. They'll want a cash buyer, no contingencies, to avoid spooking the market further." A slow, deliberate smile touched Annelise's lips. "Good." Back in her gilded cage, Annelise played her part to perfection. She was quiet, somber, and seemingly worried. She'd bring Conrad food he wouldn't eat and ask if there was anything she could do, knowing he would just snarl at her to leave him alone. Her feigned helplessness was his last remaining pillar of superiority, and he clung to it. Meanwhile, her real work happened in the dead of night. In the silence of her dressing room with the door locked, she sat on the floor, her back against the wall, the glow of her burner phone illuminating her face. She was liquidating. With a few taps, she sold a majority stake in a triptych by a Ghanaian painter she'd bought for pennies 5 years ago. It had just been featured in the Venice Biennale, and its value had exploded by 8,000%. The sale, handled through a Swiss intermediary Finch had arranged, was slant and massive. Next went a portfolio of early 20th century photographic prints she had inherited. Finally, she authorized Finch to draw a significant sum from her grandmother's trust, a fund so discreetly managed it was practically invisible to modern financial surveillance. The money flowed not into a conventional bank account, but into a newly created shell corporation with an impossibly banal name, Mid-Atlantic Holdings LLC. The operation was clean, swift, and utterly untraceable back to Annelise Rowan. To the outside world, she was still the dependent, the kept woman with nothing but a high-limit credit card to her name. In reality, she was becoming one of the most liquid individuals in New York City. Conrad's world, in contrast, was becoming entirely illiquid. One afternoon, Annelise watched from the living room window as a team of men in suits arrived. They weren't visitors. They were appraisers. They moved through the penthouse with clipboards, their voices low, their expressions grim. They catalogued the custom furniture, the Gaggenau kitchen appliances, the integrated sound system. Conrad had locked himself in his office, refusing to come out. It was a profound humiliation, his kingdom being inventoried for auction right under his nose. That evening, the final fatal blow landed. A news alert flashed across every financial terminal in the world. The Belgian consortium had successfully and completely acquired the entire coltan mining and distribution network. The article mentioned a catastrophic failure of strategy and a classic case of hubris on the part of Gideon Industries. Conrad's name was now synonymous with failure. The door to the command center opened. Conrad emerged, but he was a changed man. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out emptiness. His face was grey, his expensive suit rumpled. He looked like a king who had just been forced to sign the articles of his own abdication. He saw Annelise standing by the window. He didn't speak for a long time. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant hum of the city. "They're taking it all," he said, his voice a dead monotone. "The company, the jet, the houses." His eyes swept across the magnificent room, the view of Central Park, the skyline he had once claimed to own. "They're taking this place too. The bank is seizing it tomorrow morning." He finally looked at her, and a flicker of his old cruel self returned. He needed to find one last person to place beneath him. "I guess this is it," he said with a pathetic sneer. "Your free ride is over. I hope you saved some of your allowance." Annelise simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You should pack," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Whatever you can fit in a suitcase. They'll probably let you take that. Go back to whatever hovel you came from." He walked to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, his hand trembling slightly. "I meant what I said, Annelise. You won't survive this. You don't have what it takes." She didn't reply. She just turned and walked towards her bedroom, her footsteps silent on the cold marble floor. He thought she was going to pack. He thought she was defeated. He was wrong. She was going to get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a very big day. The morning arrived with a brutal clinical greyness that the penthouse's vast windows couldn't filter out. The city below was shrouded in a low-hanging mist, a perfect mirror for the fog of defeat that had settled over Conrad Gideon. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night alternating between impotent phone calls to lawyers who were now hedging their bets and staring at the Bloomberg terminal as his net worth plummeted into negative territory. The billionaire status that had defined him was evaporating in real time. The official notification came via email at 8:05 a.m. It was from the bank's legal department, a sterile, heartless document informing him that as per the terms of his loan agreement, they were exercising their right to take possession of the asset known as Penthouse 76, the Aethelgard. He was required to vacate the premises by noon. A representative would arrive to change the locks. A wave of nausea and pure, unadulterated rage washed over him. He, Conrad Gideon, was being evicted, thrown out of his own home like a common deadbeat. He hurled his crystal water glass against the wall, where it shattered with a pathetic crash that was immediately swallowed by the immense space. He stormed out of his office to find Annelise. She was in the kitchen calmly making tea, as if it were any other Tuesday. She was dressed not in one of the designer outfits he'd bought her, but in a simple, elegant black dress, her hair tied back neatly. She looked composed, efficient. The sight of her tranquility infuriated him. "Are you deaf?" he spat. "Did you not hear what I said last night? We're being thrown out. This is over, and you're making tea." "There's no point in panicking, Conrad," she said, pouring hot water over the leaves. The aroma of chamomile filled the air. "It changes nothing. Of course it changes nothing for you." He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You never had anything to lose. You were just along for the ride." He strode over to her and grabbed the small suitcase she had placed by the kitchen entrance. "Is this it? Is this all you have to show for 3 years of living like a queen?" Annelise looked at the suitcase, then back at him. "It's all I need." His face twisted into a sneer. "Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic." He felt a desperate need to inflict one final wound to prove that he still held some power, even in his ruin. "Get out. Right now. I don't want to see your face when they come to kick me out of my own home. Go. Your fairy tale is over. Welcome back to the real world." He expected tears, pleading perhaps a belated realization of the gravity of her situation. He received none of it. Annelise simply picked up her teacup, took a slow, deliberate sip, and placed it back on the counter. She met his gaze with an unnerving calm. "All right, Conrad?" She walked to the small suitcase, her posture perfect, her steps unhurried. She didn't look back at the art on the walls, the sprawling view, or the man whose life was imploding. She approached the private elevator, her keycard still in her hand. For one last time, she swiped it. The bronze doors slid open with a soft chime. She stepped inside, turned to face him, and just before the doors closed, she gave him a small, enigmatic smile. It wasn't a smile of sadness or defeat. It was something else, something he couldn't decipher, and that terrified him more than anything. The doors closed, and she was gone. Conrad stood alone in the vast, silent penthouse. The emptiness was absolute. For 3 years, Annelise's presence had been a quiet hum in the background of his life, a presence he had taken for granted, ignored, and belittled. Now her absence was a roar. The space felt not just empty, but soulless. He spent the next 2 hours in a daze, wandering from room to room. He touched the cold marble countertops, stared at the skyline that no longer felt like his, and saw his reflection in the dark screens of the dozens of televisions embedded in the walls. He saw a ghost, a fraud, a man who had flown too close to the sun and had his wings of debt and hubris melted away. At precisely 11:45 a.m., the doorbell chimed. Not the private elevator, but the service entrance. He opened it to find two men in nondescript suits and a uniformed building security manager. "Mr. Gideon," the first man said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We are representatives from the bank's asset recovery unit. We're here to secure the property." They were polite but firm. They watched as he gathered a few personal effects into a briefcase, a photograph of his late father, a watch, a framed copy of the magazine cover that had first called him a billionaire. It felt like a lifetime ago. As he was escorted to the service elevator, the final humiliation being denied access to his own private one, he asked the security manager a question that had been gnawing at him. "Has the bank already found a buyer?" he asked, trying to sound casual, as if it were a matter of mild curiosity. The manager, a man named Philip, whom Conrad had never bothered to learn the name of, shrugged. "They move fast on these things, sir, especially prime assets like this. They don't like uncertainty." "Some vulture, I'm sure," Conrad muttered. "One of my rivals picking over the bones." He imagined one of his competitor's men he had mocked and beaten in deals past smugly walking through these rooms, enjoying his downfall. The thought was acid in his stomach. He stepped out of the service elevator into the building's sterile loading bay. The concrete and exposed pipes were a brutal contrast to the opulence he had just left. A taxi he had called was waiting. As he got in, he looked up, trying to see the window of his penthouse, 76 floors above. But from down here, it was just an anonymous sliver of glass in a tower of glass, indistinguishable from the rest. He was no longer the king in his castle. He was just another man on the street. Just as he had predicted for Annelise. The irony was so bitter, he could barely breathe. He slammed the taxi door, and as the car pulled into the relentless flow of Manhattan traffic, Conrad Gideon, the ex-billionaire, was swallowed by the city that had once been his kingdom. He had hit rock bottom, or so he thought. While Conrad was being unceremoniously evicted, Annelise Rowan was sitting in the hushed, book-lined office of Alistair Finch. The air here didn't carry the scent of defeat, but of old leather paper and quiet victory. She had traded her simple black dress for a sharply tailored navy blue pantsuit. She was not a victim. She was a client, a commander. The suitcase she'd left the Aethelgard with sat by her chair. Inside wasn't clothing, but her burner phone, a hard drive containing all her research on Conrad's deals, and the small, moody painting Conrad had called The Smudge. Mr. Finch peered at her over his spectacles, a rare, genuine smile on his face. "The final transfer has been confirmed, Annelise. Mid-Atlantic Holdings LLC is now, shall we say, extraordinarily well capitalized." He slid a tablet across the desk. It displayed a single number, a figure with so many zeros that it looked more like a code than a sum of money. It was more than enough. It was a war chest. His downfall was remarkably swift, Finch noted, with the detached interest of a historian observing a predictable battle. "Hubris is a potent accelerator," Annelise said, her voice steady. "He built a tower on a sinkhole and called it a fortress. All it needed was a little push." Finch's eyes twinkled. He knew about the little push. He had admired the elegant simplicity of her move with the analyst. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't overt. It was a masterpiece of soft power, using the enemy's own assumptions against him. Conrad saw a beautiful, vapid woman making small talk. The analyst saw a chance to gain an edge. Neither saw the truth. "The bank's asset division contacted me an hour ago." Finch continued, getting down to business. "As I predicted, they are seeking an immediate all-cash, no-contingency offer for Penthouse 76. They want to close the books on the Gideon debacle by the end of the day. They have a floor price, but they are highly motivated. What's the floor? Annelise asked. Finch named a number that would have made most millionaires blanch. Annelise didn't flinch. Offer them 5% above that. But the offer is only good for the next 60 minutes, and it must be completely anonymous. They will know the buyer only as Mid-Atlantic Holdings. Finch raised an eyebrow, impressed. Adding time pressure. Aggressive. I like it. It signals you're not a bottom feeder trying to lowball them. It signals you're a serious entity that knows what it wants and is prepared to pay for speed and discretion. He picked up his phone. I'll make the call. While Finch spoke in hushed, precise tones to the bank's lawyers, Annelise looked at the small painting she had propped up on the corner of the desk. The turbulent blue sky, the defiant slash of gold. For 3 years it had been her private symbol of resilience in a world of sterile, soulless luxury. Conrad had seen a smudge. She saw a storm and the promise of a sunrise after. She had bought it from the artist, a struggling single mother in Brooklyn, for a few $1,000s. That artist was now on the long list for the Turner Prize. The painting was worth a small fortune, but that wasn't why she kept it. She kept it as a reminder of what it meant to see value where others saw nothing. She had spent 3 years being seen as nothing, an ornament, a pretty face, a dependent. Conrad, in his colossal arrogance, had never once thought to look deeper. He never asked about her family beyond confirming they were not a threat to his dominance. He never asked about her passions beyond what could be leveraged for his image. He saw a bird in a cage and never imagined it was a phoenix in disguise, patiently waiting for the world to burn so it could be reborn from the ashes. Finch hung up the phone. His expression was placid, but his eyes were triumphant. They have accepted the offer, he said. They were to use the vernacular flawed. The speed and size of the cash offer were beyond their expectations. They are drafting the preliminary paperwork now. We will need to wire the funds within the hour to an escrow account. Annelise nodded. Do it. The Penthouse will officially be the property of Mid-Atlantic Holdings by 3 o'clock this afternoon, Finch stated. He paused, allowing the weight of the statement to settle. Congratulations, Miss Rowan. You are for all intents and purposes the new owner of the Aethelgard Penthouse. Annelise felt a tremor pass through her, not of excitement, but of profound tectonic release. It was the feeling of a prisoner walking into the sunlight for the first time in years. The cage was not just open. She now owned the cage, the bars, the lock, and the key. There is one more thing, Mr. Finch, she said, her voice taking on a new steely edge. I need you to contact the Aethelgard's building management. Inform them of the change of ownership. Instruct them that under no circumstances is Conrad Gideon to be permitted access to the 76th floor. He is not a resident. He is not a guest. If he appears, he is to be treated as any other member of the public. Finch almost chuckled. Consider it done. And finally, she said, leaning forward, please arrange for a team of contractors and designers to meet me at the property tomorrow morning at 9. I want everything of his gone. The furniture, the fixtures, the technology. Everything. I want it stripped back to the bare walls. We're starting over. She stood up and picked up her painting. Mr. Gideon told me I would never survive without him, she said, looking at Finch. He believed survival was about clinging to his world. He never understood that true survival is about building your own. She left the office and stepped out into the bright afternoon sun. New York City. The city that had been the backdrop for her captivity suddenly looked different. It looked like home. The Phoenix had taken flight. The process of acquiring a 9-figure property in Manhattan is typically a labyrinth of paperwork, due diligence, and protracted negotiations. For Mid-Atlantic Holdings LLC, it was a lightning strike. The bank, desperate to erase the toxic Gideon name from its books and dazzled by a clean all-cash offer that exceeded their best-case scenario, moved with astonishing speed. By 2:47 p.m., a river of digital money untraceable to Annelise Rowan flowed from an offshore account into the designated escrow. By 3:15 p.m., digital signatures were affixed to the closing documents. A courier delivered a single unassuming folder to Mr. Finch's office containing the deed and the access keys. The Aethelgard Penthouse, the symbol of Conrad Gideon's power and ego, now belonged to the woman he had discarded that very morning. Annelise spent the rest of the afternoon not in celebration, but in preparation. She met with a woman named Helene Dubois, a fiercely minimalist interior architect known for her work with art collectors. Helene was sharp, intuitive, and had a reputation for working quickly and discreetly. They met in a quiet corner of the restaurant inside the Museum of Modern Art. Over espresso, Annelise laid out her vision. "I want it erased, Helene," Annelise said, her voice firm. "I don't want a renovation. I want an exorcism. Every trace of him, his taste, his presence, gone." Helene, a chic woman with cropped silver hair and stark black glasses, listened intently. "Describe his taste." "Cold," Annelise said without hesitation. "Impressive but not inviting. Marble chrome, black leather. Technology meant to intimidate. It feels like the lobby of a bank that's about to fail." A flicker of understanding crossed Helene's face. "And your vision. Warmth, texture, life, natural woods, soft fabrics, brass that patinas over time. I want walls that are meant for art, not for 80-inch television screens. I want a home, not a showroom. And I want it done by the end of the month." Helene's eyes widened slightly at the timeline, but then narrowed with professional zeal. "It will be a military operation, but it's possible. We gut it first. Everything out. Then we rebuild. What is the one thing that must stay?" Annelise smiled. "The view." By the time she left the museum, Helene's team was already sourcing materials and assembling crews. The demolition was scheduled to begin in 36 hours. That evening, Annelise did not go to a 5-star hotel. She checked into a small, elegant boutique hotel in Greenwich Village. The room was a fraction of the size of her former dressing room, but it felt more honest. She ordered room service, and for the first time in 3 years, she ate a meal that wasn't dictated by Conrad's schedule or social obligations. The next morning, she arrived at the Aethelgard at precisely 9:00 a.m. She walked through the grand lobby, not as a resident's companion, but as the building's most powerful owner. The doorman who had seen her leave with a single suitcase the day before now rushed to open the door for her, his eyes wide with confusion and awe. Mr. Finch had been thorough. She took the main private elevator, the one Conrad had been denied access to. As she ascended, she felt the pressure changing in her ears, a physical manifestation of her rise. The bronze doors opened directly into the penthouse. It was exactly as she had left it, but the silence was different now. It was no longer the oppressive silence of dread, but the peaceful silence of ownership. Conrad's abandoned briefcase was still on the floor, a pathetic monument to his defeat. The shattered remains of the water glass were still scattered on the marble. A few minutes later, Helene Dubois arrived with her team of contractors. They walked through the space, their footsteps echoing. While Helene gave clipped, precise orders, pointing at walls to be demolished and fixtures to be ripped out. Annelise walked over to the main floor-to-ceiling window. She looked down at the city at Central Park, sprawling below a green lung in the heart of the concrete metropolis. When she had looked out this window with Conrad, she had felt like a prisoner looking at a world she couldn't touch. Now she felt a profound sense of connection, of possibility. It was her city, her view. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Mr. Finch. Subject: an interesting development. The message read, "Mr. Gideon has apparently been making inquiries. He contacted his former real estate broker, who of course knows nothing. He seems to be operating under the assumption that a business rival he specifically suspects the head of the Belgian consortium purchased the property to gloat. He is by all accounts consumed with finding out the identity of the buyer." Annelise allowed herself a small, cold smile. Let him hunt. Let him chase shadows. The truth was so far beyond his comprehension, he would never find it. Her work was just beginning. Over the next few weeks, the penthouse was a hive of activity. The cold marble was torn out, replaced by warm, wide plank oak. The stark white walls were repainted in soft, complex shades of cream and grey. The oppressive, intimidating home automation system was ripped out, replaced by simple, elegant brass light switches. An army of carpenters built floor-to-ceiling bookshelves in what was once Conrad's cavernous, empty formal dining room, transforming it into a library. The master bedroom, once a sterile chamber of black and chrome, was softened with linens, wools, and velvets. And in the main living area, where Conrad's monstrous television had once dominated, there was now just a single, perfectly lit wall. It was waiting. Annelise was there every day, not just observing, but participating. She learned the difference between shades of white, the feel of different woods, the way light moved through the space at different times of day. She was not just decorating a space, she was reclaiming her life, 1 square foot at a time. And on the final day, the art arrived. Not the cold, predictable blue-chip pieces Conrad had owned, but the vibrant, challenging personal works Annelise loved. And on that main feature wall in the heart of the home, a team of professional art handlers carefully installed her small painting, The Smudge. Now hung in a place of honor, illuminated by a museum-quality light, the painting was transformed. The turbulent blues spoke of depth and resilience. The defiant slash of gold was not a flaw, but a focal point. It was a beacon. It was a declaration. The exorcism was complete. The penthouse was no longer Conrad's monument to his ego. It was Annelise's testament to her survival. Now all that was missing was the ghost. Conrad Gideon was a man adrift in a sea of his own making. The fall had been harder and faster than he could have ever imagined. His name was mud in the financial world. Former colleagues now crossed the street to avoid him. The sycophants who had once laughed at his every joke no longer returned his calls. He had crashed out of the stratosphere and was now navigating the grimy pavement of reality. He was staying in a corporate hotel in Midtown, a place he would have once considered utterly beneath him, paid for by the last dregs of a personal account the banks hadn't seized. Every morning he would wake up in the anonymous room, the unfamiliar patterns on the carpet and the generic art on the walls, a constant reminder of his demotion. His entire existence had become an exercise in humiliation. But one obsession consumed him, burning through the fog of his depression, the Aethelgard. Who had bought his penthouse? His mind circled the usual suspects. Was it Laurent Dubois, the smug head of the Belgian consortium, who had orchestrated his ruin? The thought of Laurent drinking his vintage Bordeaux while looking out at his view made Conrad physically ill. Was it another Wall Street rival, someone he had bested years ago, now enjoying the ultimate revenge? He spent his days making pathetic, wheedling calls. He tried his old real estate broker, who claimed the deal was sealed under an ironclad NDA. He tried to corner a junior banker he knew, who nervously stammered that the buyer was just a holding company, a ghost in the machine. The secrecy only fueled his paranoia. A rival would want to brag to rub his face in it. The silence was unnerving. It felt personal. Finally, after a week of hitting brick walls, his frustration boiled over. He had to see. He had to know. He took a taxi to 57th Street and stood across the street from the Aethelgard, staring up at its impossible height. It was like looking at an ex-lover who had moved on and become more beautiful without you. Taking a deep breath, he walked towards the entrance, his old arrogance flickering back to life. He still knew the staff. Philip, the security manager, would let him up for old times' sake. He would just say he left something behind. He strode into the lobby, his head held high. The doorman, the same one who had watched him leave in disgrace, saw him coming. The man's face remained impassive, but he subtly moved to block Conrad's path to the resident elevators. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you?" The sir was professional, but lacked the deference it once held. "Philip," Conrad said, trying for a tone of old boys' club familiarity. "I need to go up to the Penthouse for a moment. I think I left my favorite cufflinks." The doorman didn't move. "I'm sorry, Mr. Gideon. I can't do that." Conrad's face hardened. "What do you mean you can't do that?" "I lived here for 3 years." "My instructions are very clear," the doorman said, his voice firm but polite. "The new owner has stipulated that you are not permitted on the residential floors. If you have an issue, you can take it up with building management." The humiliation was a physical blow. To be denied entry by a man he had never even bothered to tip properly. He was no longer a resident. He was a security risk. A handful of people in the lobby were starting to stare, recognizing his face from his more glorious and more infamous days. "This is ridiculous." Conrad hissed, his voice low. "Who is the new owner?" "Just tell me the name." "That information is confidential, sir," the doorman replied, his posture unyielding. "Now, if you don't have any other business here, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Defeated, Conrad turned and stalked out of the lobby, the barely suppressed whispers of the onlookers following him like a cloud of wasps. He stood on the sidewalk, shaking with a powerless rage. It wasn't Laurent Dubois. It wasn't a rival. They would have wanted him to know. They would have reveled in this moment, perhaps even orchestrated it. This was different. This was cold, silent, and absolute. He retreated to his drab hotel room and stewed. He had been erased. His legacy, his home, his name, all gone. He felt like a non-person. He had one last, desperate idea. He remembered Annelise's lawyer, the old fossil Finch. He had scoffed at the man, but he was the only link Conrad had to Annelise's past. Perhaps she knew something. Perhaps in his ruin, she might even take pity on him. It was a pathetic hope, but it was all he had left. He found the number for Finch's firm online. He called, his voice humbled, his tone stripped of its usual command. He asked to leave a message for the new owner of the Aethelgard Penthouse. He didn't know why, but he felt that was his only route in. "Please convey that Conrad Gideon requests a brief meeting," he said to the legal secretary. "It is a personal matter." He hung up, feeling like the world's biggest fool. Why would the new owner, whoever they were, ever agree to meet him? It was a shot in the dark, a final desperate plea from a fallen king shouting from the courtyard, hoping the new monarch in the tower might hear him. He didn't expect a reply, which is why he was so stunned when his phone rang 2 days later. It was an unlisted number. "Hello?" He answered, his voice tentative. "Mr. Gideon," said a cool female voice he vaguely recognized as the secretary from Finch's office. "Regarding your request, the owner has agreed to a meeting." Conrad sat bolt upright. "They have... when, where?" "This evening, 6 o'clock, at the Penthouse." The words hit him like a jolt of electricity. He was being allowed back in. Perhaps it was a rival after all, and they had simply been waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves and gloat. He didn't care. He had to know. "I'll be there," he said, his mind racing. He would be humble. He would be gracious. He would try to salvage some shred of dignity. As he prepared for the meeting, choosing the one good suit he had left, he felt a flicker of his old self returning. He was Conrad Gideon. He had built an empire from nothing once before. He could do it again. This meeting, this strange invitation back into his old home, felt like a sign, a chance to close one chapter and begin the next. He was walking into the lion's den, but he was convinced he could still tame the lion. He had no idea he was the prey. At 5:55 p.m., Conrad Gideon stood once more in the lobby of the Aethelgard. This time, the doorman nodded at him and gestured towards the private elevator. "The owner is expecting you, sir." The formality was chilling. He was a guest in his own former kingdom. The ascent in the bronze-walled elevator was surreal. Every hum and click was a memory. He remembered bringing world leaders up in this elevator, closing deals, celebrating victories. Now he was rising towards an unknown future summoned by his conqueror. He steeled himself. Whatever was waiting for him on the other side, he would face it with the composure he had left. The doors slid open, and the world stopped. It was his penthouse, yet it was not. The geography was the same, but the soul was utterly different. The cold white marble was gone, replaced by warm dark oak that seemed to absorb the sound and soften the light. The stark, intimidating furniture had vanished. In its place were comfortable-looking sofas, shelves filled with actual books and textures of wool and linen. The air, which had always been sterile and chilled, now felt warm, alive, and scented faintly with sandalwood and old paper. What was once a mausoleum of wealth was now unmistakably a home. And there, standing by the vast window, silhouetted against the glittering twilight cityscape, was a figure. Not a man. Not Laurent Dubois or any of his Wall Street rivals. It was Annelise. She was not in one of the flowing gowns he had bought her. She was wearing a simple, elegant silk blouse and dark trousers. In her hand was not a glass of champagne, but a tumbler of what looked like whiskey. She turned slowly to face him, her expression not triumphant, not gloating, but calm. Terribly, unshakably calm. Conrad's mind simply refused to process what he was seeing. He blinked, expecting the mirage to fade. It didn't. He felt the blood drain from his face. "Annelise," he whispered the name, a strange, foreign sound in his mouth. "What? How are you here?" "I live here," she said, her voice even. "I believe the correct term is welcome to my home." He stared at her, then around the transformed room, his brain trying to connect dots that made no sense. "You live here as a guest. Did Laurent Dubois buy this place and install you here to mock me?" It was the only explanation his shattered ego could conjure. A small, pitying smile touched her lips. You still don't see it, do you, Conrad? You look, but you don't see. You never did. She took a slow sip of her drink. Laurent Dubois doesn't own this penthouse. Mid-Atlantic Holdings does. And I own Mid-Atlantic Holdings. The words hung in the air, each one a hammer blow against the fragile scaffolding of his reality. He stumbled back a step, his hand finding the wall for support. It wasn't cold marble. It was a textured, painted wall. Alien. No, he stammered. That's impossible. You have nothing. I told you, you can't survive. His own words came back to mock him, hollow and absurd. You told me I couldn't survive without you, she corrected him gently. It turns out I just couldn't thrive with you. She gestured towards the main wall where a single painting hung under a soft light. It was the smudge. His smudge. But here in this context, it was magnificent. It was the heart of the room. You saw a worthless painting, she said. I saw the nascent genius of a brilliant artist whose work is now worth more than your entire company was the day you met me. You looked at my grandmother's legacy and saw old money dust. I saw a foundation. You looked at me and you saw a decoration, an object. It never once occurred to you to look for a person. The pieces began to click into place in his mind, forming a picture of such profound and total defeat that he felt his knees weaken. The quiet trips she took, her time on that burner phone, the lawyer he'd dismissed as a fossil, the casual throwaway comment at the dinner party about his supply chain, the analyst. He breathed the realization dawning. The Belgian consortium. That was you. I may have provided a piece of misdirection, she conceded, swirling the amber liquid in her glass. You taught me so much about strategy, Conrad. You just never thought I was listening. Your fatal flaw wasn't the coltan deal. It was your assumption that anyone you deemed insignificant was also unintelligent. You built your empire on that assumption. It was an empire built on a foundation of condescension, and they always crumble. He was speechless. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and utterly dismantled, not by a rival king, but by the quiet woman he had treated as part of the furniture. He wasn't just broke. He was a fool. The entire world had seen him as a failed titan. Only he and she knew the full, humiliating truth. He was the author of his own destruction, and she had simply edited the final chapter. He looked around the room again at the warmth and the books, and the life she had breathed into this hollow space. He had owned it, but she possessed it. He had merely occupied it. She inhabited it. Why? He finally managed to ask, his voice a broken rasp. Why do all this? Why show me? Annelise walked slowly towards him, stopping a few feet away. She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze clear and unwavering. There was no hatred in it, no anger. There was something far more devastating indifference. You told me I would never survive, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, echoing his own words back at him from that final fateful night. I just wanted you to have a clear view of what my survival looks like. She then did the last thing he ever expected. She gestured towards the elevator. The doorman can call you a cab, she said, her tone final. She turned her back on him and walked back to the window, picking up her drink, her attention returning to the city below. To her city. The interview was over. He was dismissed. Conrad Gideon stood for a moment, a ghost in a home that was no longer his, in a life that had moved on without him. He turned and walked into the elevator. His shoulders slumped. The bronze doors slid shut, sealing him in darkness, carrying him down away from the sky, away from the light. As he descended, he knew with a certainty that crushed his very soul that he hadn't just lost his fortune or his home. He had lost a reality he never even knew existed, and he would spend the rest of his life haunted by the view from the top, a view that was no longer his to see. That wasn't just a story about wealth or revenge. It was a story about value. Conrad Gideon saw value only in things that could be bought, dominated, and displayed. Annelise Rowan understood true value in art, in quiet strength, and most importantly, in herself. He thought her survival depended on his money, when all along her success depended on her escape from his shadow. She didn't just buy a penthouse. She reclaimed her own narrative, proving that the most powerful assets we have are the intelligence, resilience, and vision that others underestimate. Her victory wasn't loud or explosive. It was a quiet, deliberate sunrise that he was too blind to see coming until he was left in the cold. If Annelise's story of quiet strength and calculated victory resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own hidden power. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss our next story of when the underestimated finally get their due.